Okay. Do you want to play what? Okay. Say hello to my little friend!
Welcome everyone. So I've been playing a lot of Linnea and I've been trying to understand as much as I can to share with you guys before her release. So Linnea is a healer, Geo DPS buffer and a sub DPS. She's very much a triple threat for all Geo teams. You could think of her like a Gorou or Xilonen replacement. But even though she works for all Geo DPSs, she will naturally push these Geo teams towards the Lunar Crystallized Geo Hydro playstyle. Zibai was already balanced to be alongside other top DPSs with her current teammates, and her current teammates including 2 4-stars. So that makes Linnea the after sales DLC for Zibai on top of all that. And you can expect over 20% team DPS improvement. She's not quite as critical to her teams as Lauma or Ineffa is to Electrocharge, but we'll get into that. It's also not just about theoretical DPS too, because Linnea's mechanics are also the best suited solution to modern boss fights and modern fights that you'll be taking your Geo team to. I would say she's similar to how Columbina affected Ineffa. A lot of people pulled Columbina to improve on their Ino. With Ineffa, Columbina isn't really giving more buffs to Ineffa than Ino was. C6 Ino specifically, but the team is overall stronger because Columbina's personal damage and her extra quality of life. In that regard, it's a similar story with Linnea replacing either Gorou or Illuga. And importantly, in regards to all those 4-stars, their biggest strengths is that they are balanced around their C6s. If you're missing some of these constellations, then the 5-star character who was already an upgrade is going to be a massive upgrade. The first thing Columbina did is her burst stores charge attacks for Ineffa. That makes it so you don't have any downtime between your charge attacks. Secondly, this big AoE Hydra application does follow you around and it's activated with her skill, which is very nice. By comparison, Ino's AoE is very big, but it's not going to follow you around, so you can often run into trouble, especially with a character like Ineffa, who relies on these Dendro reactions in order to build her stacks. Also, Columbina being a catalyst user is very helpful because Ineffa teams often struggle with fitting in healers. Lastly, her being a 5-star does provide additional vertical investment scaling options. Similarly, Linnea has extras for Zibai. See, in the old teams, Gorou technically does have healing on his C4, but it's really not that much. By comparison, with her burst, Linnea is definitely a proper healer. Unfortunately, similar to Escoffier and unlike Ineffa, that healing does require their bursts, whereas Ineffa's sustain is functional just with her shield. But as we'll get into, her burst doesn't actually do anything apart from healing, so this can create scenarios where you only really use her burst when you need that extra healing, and for the most part you can kind of just use Linnea's skill and then switch off of her. Healing is extra important though, because new content like the new Geo boss Radiant Moongecko has mechanics that does require your Geo team to have a lot of healing. It's not just him, but there's also the Radiant Moonfly that has a similar mechanic. So theoretical DPS otherwise, Linnea being a genuine healer in some of these Geo teams which may have lacked traditional healing is a very significant mechanic. Linnea also generates a lot of off-field Geo particles for your Zibai or your other Geo DPS. You can see I've got 2 there, and then another 3, and all that will add up to make it a lot easier on your energy requirements and a lot easier to use your burst more consistently. In comparison, someone like Gorou maybe only generates 2 Geo particles a pop. And lastly, just like Columbina, she does provide additional avenues for vertical investment, whether it's a weapon or constellations. Her basic attacks are not very important. It's just a standard 3-hit combo of bow users. Her charge attack does have unique exploration benefits. For example, mining. Very cool. Discharge attack can also capture animals. Honestly, since this is more of an exploration fun related mechanic, I'll leave it to you to figure out how you utilize this. The basic Linnea gameplay is you use her skill, switch out of her, and then switch to your damage dealer. It's just that simple. Just use her skill, which summons Lumi, which does sub DPS, and it gives you 15% Geo Res Shred and 15% extra, so 30 total if your party's in Ascendant Gleam. Geo Res Shred in these teams is very good because it buffs both your raw damage and the Lunar Crystallized Moondrift damage. And just in case you forgot, play a team with 2 Nodcry characters, you'll get the Ascendant Gleam bonus. She also increases your character's EM based on her defense, 5% of her defense. With this build here, without any extra defense buffs, I'm getting about 120 EM. It's not going to be as big as Sucrose or Nahida, but it's similar to an instructor set, so it's very powerful. The actual mechanic with this though is, if you're playing her with a Nodcry character, this EM buff will go to that DPS. So if you're playing her with Zibai or Columbina, they will get that. However, if you're playing her with a non-Nodcry DPS, like Navia, maybe in a team like this, then Linnea will get the EM buff. This is completely fine because in Geo teams, only Nodcry characters really care about the EM anyway. Her skill has 3 variations. There's a tap, you can tap twice, or you can tap and then normal attack. It's a bit awkward like Dorian, so you have to get used to it. For most situations, you just want to use her tap though. It will give you the most consistent off-field damage. They did design the other variations as some sort of nuke. For most situations, just use tap E though. To be honest, I could be wrong, but I don't imagine these variations having much meta use. I will say if you're playing high ping like me, just doing a tap and then switching off could be a bit annoying. You have to make sure not to press too many buttons. You can easily just switch to your Linnea and end up pressing too much buttons waiting for the inputs to register, which is not nice. So what kind of sub DPS could you expect with Linnea? I'm going to be using a decent budget build here. So is that impressive? You decide. That was with Slingshot and All Bad set with level 10 talents. This was the build. It's pretty decent. Let's compare that versus a signature weapon Chiori and a golden troop set with these stats. So you can already see Linnea's damage is very nice, and also the AoE is quite noticeably better than Chiori. So just like what Escoffier did for freeze teams with her sub DPS on top of her support, Linnea is doing a similar thing there. Linnea's burst is similar to Escoffier's. It's got an initial team-wide heal and then healing over time on your active character only. But unlike Escoffier, Escoffier's burst does initial quite decent damage and then the healing. Linnea's burst just does healing. But it does function similar to Ineffa's burst, where the burst does refresh your skill. I also want to show you a healing comparison. This is the same Linnea build versus your average Xilonen Fav Sword build. Both their bursts heal for 12 seconds each, but Xilonen's is only single target healing. There is no initial burst. Linnea has that initial team-wide healing and then continuous healing. But as you'll see, Linnea's multipliers are a bit smaller than Xilonen's. And then if I cast Xilonen's burst, there is no team-wide healing, but we're getting pretty decent 5,000. Maybe your Xilonen has a 6,000 HP healing. But let me use Linnea's burst. See that big team-wide healing at the start? And then I've got smaller healing over time. But it is worth noting though, with Xilonen, because she kind of does no damage, the way most people build her is with a lot of defense. And honestly, even healing bonus circlets. Whereas with Linnea, because she does sub DPS, you're probably trying to get a bit of damage as well, and you're definitely not using a healing bonus circlet. But if I did have to give an answer, I would say Linnea's healing maybe is kind of better, generally speaking, because of that initial team-wide healing. Plus, Xilonen's healing was kind of too much anyway in a lot of teams. You shouldn't mind that some of that healing budget is taken away, but it is being put into her damage. So one thing I'm sure a lot of people want to know, is Linnea the Geo, Ineffa, Escoffier, Chevreuse, Lauma? And I'm just going to say straight up, I don't think she is. When I think of a Geo Lauma or a Geo Escoffier, I think about how characters like Skirk or Neffa, these DPSs face significant damage losses if they're not played with that signature support. As I prefaced earlier, Zibai was already balanced to be basically a complete unit on par with the other Nodquai DPSs at her release with Illuga and Gorou. So Linnea is just the cherry on top. A big issue though is that these 4 stars get big damage spikes with their constellations, especially their C6s. And getting a C6 4-star, especially a new 4-star, is not easy. So if you're comparing Linnea to a low constellation Gorou or Illuga, she is getting closer to that Lauma or Escoffier level. However, ultimately, there is no 4-star Lauma, 4-star Escoffier, 4-star Ineffa. The other elemental DPSs don't have budget options to bridge the gap. However, Zibai does, so Linnea is a smaller upgrade and therefore not as important as the others. So you probably want to know, how do you build your Linnea? First of all, like many other 5 stars, she ascends with crit rate. Defense, crit rate, crit damage, EM and ER are all useful stats. She does both raw geo damage and lunar crystallized moondrift reactions. Hence, she does use both defense and EM offensively. You're probably wondering, defense stats versus crit stats. They're actually very close offensively, factoring in the fact that increasing her defense increases her buff, whereas a crit stat instead slightly improves her personal damage more. However, in my experience, increasing her defense increases her healing as well. And honestly, in my testing, that is very useful. I would say if you have 2 pieces that are pretty similar, I would rather get more defense than more crit. This is the overall build I've gone with. That's my stats. I went for the slingshot. This is the 3-star bow. I went for the all bad set, and these are my stats. It's a mix of crit, defense, EM, ER, C0, and then my talents have gone 1, 10, 10. So for weapon options, you're looking for weapons with crit. Since there aren't really many bows that give defense, her signature weapon being one of the few that gives defense and some buffs. As you can see, this signature does give a lot of crit damage. What are we getting at max? We're getting 88% crit damage. I'll show you how strong this is in a second. Another 5-star is also Elegy for the End. I'm not a big fan of this, but it does give some team-wide EM buffs. For 4 stars, you have a Favonius bow. In addition to Snare Hook, if you have this is the craftable weapon. It does give some EM and ER. However, my general recommendation and what I use to clear all the content is Slingshot, the 3-star gacha weapon. You should probably have this R5 already, but you might not have it level 90. It is worth getting. Linnea doesn't care about the low base attack of 3-star weapons. She just cares about the crit and the damage buffs here. So you probably want to see a comparison of Slingshot versus her signature. Let me compare the weapons against a more neutral boss, like this time against the Fearless Hera. There we go. I managed to kill it before the phase change. I actually got 55 seconds. Yeah, so I did get 5 seconds faster with the signature weapon. As always though, for low cost players, it's rarely efficient to pull a support or sub DPS signature weapon compared to spending those pulls on a 5-star DPS directly. Although to be honest, Linnea has a much better weapon and some early constellations than you may expect, so it could be close. But if you're a high budget player, then feel free to go for it. Let's talk about the artifacts now. So you don't have to go for the all bad set. A lot of players have been farming this recently, but you can also use the husk set. The all bad set will give more personal damage for Linnea, but the husk set with the defense buffs will give more team buffs. I'm guessing most people probably have a better set with this. So these days, most players don't have husk. Let's say you have neither though. What are the code red choices? Honestly, it does say Silken Moon Serenade here is recommended. However, this set you should probably give to another character. like Columbina or Illuga or Farina or whoever. Honestly, the copium options probably are just mixed EM sets. Just 2-piece Flower of Paradise Lost, 2-piece Gilded Dreams. Just focus on your substats. And potentially, if you're playing an old DPS like Navia or Ningguang, maybe if you have a really good set, you could justify giving this to Linnea. But to be honest, in an old team, you could also just give this to one of the other supports like Farina. We've already gone through the substats. As for the main stats, you're going to want Defense Sands, Defense Goblet, and either crit rate, crit damage, or even a defense circlet. Defense Goblet is definitely better than a Geo Goblet because damage percent doesn't scale with all her damage and it doesn't contribute to her buffs. Let's also talk about her energy situation, which could be a misconception. You might think Linnea is very similar to Escoffier, and just like Escoffier, you need to be casting her burst every rotation, so this ER is not enough. I know a lot of you are Skirk players and you're racking up 160 to 200 ER on your Escoffier. However, in Skirk teams, you're playing Escoffier with Farina, who requires healing, and on top of that, if you do have a Escoffier signature, this also requires her to heal for the attack buff. Linnea, on the other hand, her weapon is universal and pretty much nothing in her kit really requires her to use her burst except for the healing. Linnea's healing is nice, but if you're not playing Farina, if you're playing Columbina or Ino in your teams, then healing is just healing. It's not going to be worth sacrificing those defense or crit stats on ER, or at least to build a lot of ER, it's not worth sacrificing those stats. Just burst when healing is needed. Having said that though, healing is required versus some of the recent bosses like the butterfly or the gecko, or you lose a lot of damage. And also you might be fighting those phases where you just take a lot of damage. So if you aren't planning on bursting every rotation, do make sure to time her healing in the correct phases. So let's go through some teams. I've been testing a lot of teams. This Zibai team quite obviously is going to be your dire level team. Either Illuga or Gorou. In my testing, Illuga is obviously more ideal, but there honestly wasn't that much of a difference. And if you don't have Columbina, you can definitely use Ino. A team like this will still be sufficient in basically 99% of content, but it might be a bit tough to do the very hardest dire content. At least if you don't have more investment in your 5 stars. The other obvious Geo DPS is your Navia teams. Now, in my experience, a team core like this is kind of in between Fearless and Dire level. Navia is 2 years older than Zibai, but as a Navia player myself, I really did enjoy these teams. Although up until this point, I have found the Duran, Albedo, Hexarite Navia teams to be pretty close to the old Lunar Geo teams. You know, people have been playing Xilonen, Columbina, maybe Farina. However, Linnea fits these Lunar Geo teams so well that for Navia, this will push the Lunar Geo teams noticeably ahead, especially when you consider modern content. So if you're starting from scratch, if you're just building up your Navia now, maybe you're pulling her on the Fontaine Chronicle Wish, you definitely want to start building a team like this. On top of that, Linnea's healing versus Bennett's healing. Bennett's healing is definitely going to be questionable against some of the newer fights. There is a nice amount of variations though. I actually had a great time dropping Farina and playing Ineffa instead. As always, Navia doesn't really want a triple Geo team, and Ineffa worked great instead of Farina. I actually found Farina's team-wide HP drain to have big anti-synergy versus the Gecko, because that Gecko wants your team to heal. Therefore, you're reducing your team's HP, you're forcing Linnea to heal more. It's quite a big anti-synergy. So I had a smoother fight playing Ineffa. On top of that, Ineffa adds a shield, so you're taking even less damage, putting even less burden on Linnea. I would probably recommend Farina more for more general content. You're probably also wondering, does Navia need a double Geo team? I actually tested her with Illuga and Gorou. It was definitely less DPS, but the sad thing is, the more Geo characters you have in your teams, the more suitable it is for Geo fights. So even though my damage was weaker, it wasn't that bad. Speaking of triple Geo teams, however, someone who synergizes a lot better is Itto. Obviously, Itto is still going to be weaker than Navia. He's 2 years older than Navia, who is 2 years older than Zibai. But teams like this, very nice for Itto. I would highly recommend it for Itto mains. I actually find Linnea has extra advantages for Itto, because I know a lot of people have tried to make Xilonen work well with Itto, but Xilonen didn't work properly with Triple Geo unless you had her constellations. Whereas not only is Linnea stronger, she's designed for this. Lastly, we have some civilian teams, some 4-star teammates. Although I did struggle in Fearless to clear with Noelle, you can definitely see the synergies. Although if you're playing with Noelle, you probably want to upscale your team and add some more 5-stars like Columbina, maybe Farina. Linnea's off-field geoparticles is very nice for Noelle. More civilian teams, you could be playing Ningguang. You probably have a question actually. Is Linnea Columbina wheelchair gonna be a thing? And by wheelchair, I mean playing this team outside of geo DPSs. I'm gonna be honest, I'm gonna shut it down. No. Too much of this synergy is tied around geocentric teams. I only really recommend playing Linnea with actual geo DPSs. Sure, something could be discovered down the line, but I think it's very unlikely. I'll be surprised if I'm wrong on that. So how much of a priority is pulling on Linnea's banners? Let's talk about Zibai. I think Linnea is a priority if you have low constellations on Gorou or Illuga, because Linnea is already an upgrade even if you have C6. If you don't have those C6s, she's going to be an even bigger upgrade. And she's also a priority even if you have C6 Illuga, C6 Gorou, but you want to strengthen your Zibai, you want to min-max your Zibai, she's a priority. Also, to be honest, if you're trying to clear the hardest end game and you're a Zibai player, she is a priority with these new mechanics. If you want to know my opinion for Zibai players, who's a bigger priority out of Linnea and Columbina, I'm going to be honest, I would probably lean slightly more towards Linnea being a bigger priority because of her proper healing and her off-field geo damage. Linnea's mechanics are important for the geo content. However, in my testing, Linnea, Columbina and Zibai with a 4-star weapon, like if I downgraded Zibai to the flute craftable weapon, this was clearing endgame noticeably faster than Linnea, C6 Ino and Zibai switching back to her signature weapon. So in my experience, Columbina was definitely a bigger upgrade for that cost than Zibai's signature, which means honestly you kind of do want both. However, for the 4th slot though, you'll be happy to know playing Gorou or Itto is perfectly fine. There is a much smaller gap by comparison between them. Itto will be slightly more optimal, but Gorou is more than fine. Which is nice because it gives you a bit more flexibility, since now you've got 2 5-stars to pull for Zibai. Pull priorities for Itto mains, for Navia mains, I would say if you want to strengthen them, then pull Linnea. You do want to have Columbina as well, but the improvement for Itto and the improvement for Navia will be quite noticeable, and it will help modernize them a bit. I also want to add, this video is not focused around Linnea constellations. However, if you're a dedicated geo player, it's worth noting that things like Linnea's C2 and honestly even her weapon, a lot of her early vertical investment is a massive universal geo team increase. So you're strengthening both your geo raw damage and your reaction damage. Honestly, especially considering a lot of geo characters have poor early constellations and even some poor weapons. If you're a dedicated geo main, it is a priority pulling Linnea and potentially vertically investing in her, because it will buff all your geo teams. So that's my comprehensive meta analysis for Linnea. Of course, this is my first impressions from early access, so I haven't had the rest of the community testing her for weeks. This isn't going to be the most thorough post-release analysis, but I've been very impressed with her. And to be fair, there aren't that many geo teams, so her role and how she plays in a lot of teams should be quite straightforward. And I think by the end of this video, you should have a good understanding on whether you should pull for her or whether you want to save for other teams or future archetypes. But for geo players, this is definitely a very good character. Let me know if you have further questions in the comments. I will be making more videos on Linnea. Let me know what you'd like to see, and thank you for watching, guys.